Okay, it's after 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Feel free to put in the chat box if you're having any difficulties or anything like that. If anyone sounds too quiet or anything else, let me know. So thanks everybody for logging in. As you can see here, if you're logged in to get some CEUs, make sure you type right in the chat box your name, certification number, and the state where you're certified. We are going to record the presentation and make it accessible at a later date. I'll send an email to everyone who's registered. I also want to thank all our presenters for making themselves available today. We're going to have a format for questions at the end of each section. You can type them into the chat as we go. So after each section, we'll give some, and then we'll do a question session at the end for any of our participants, for any of our panelists who are here today. So I want to thank Kristen Hughes-Evans from Sustainable Chesapeake for really curating this group of people today to teach us about manure injection for nutrient management, forage production, and profit. It is going to hopefully be very interesting and educational and practical as well. We also want to thank Maryland Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay Trust Fund, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and Manure Injection in Pennsylvania and Maryland for helping to fund getting this together. All right, Dr. Rory Maguire is going to be our first presenter today. He's going to talk about manure injection and nitrogen management. So I'll now make Rory the presenter. Here. Stop sharing my screen. Bear with us just one moment. And Rory, you should be able to share your screen now and start your presentation.
Okay, is my screen showing?
Not yet.
Okay, is it full screen now?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to this webinar. Just as a little background on myself, I've been working on manure injection for about 10 years, a little over 10 years now. So when I started, there was absolutely no manure injection going on in Virginia. I think there'd been a little bit in Maryland. But in terms of what we've learned over the last few years, I've got a list of things here, just some preliminary background stuff. The first time farmers saw my disc manure injection system, they said it wouldn't work because there were too many rocks. But what we found was every injector is independently sprung, so we had no problems with the rocky soils in the Shenandoah Valley. The number two thing was odor was dramatically reduced. It wasn't something I was thinking of when I got the manure injection. I was thinking about nitrogen availability, but we find that odor is a tremendous issue with farmers not wanting to annoy their neighbors. There aren't any specific odor regulations, but they certainly don't want to annoy their neighbors, and when you inject, there's almost no odor. One time we were spreading manure, we'd injected on about an acre, and suddenly we smelt manure. We looked over, and the farmer or the operator had forgotten to inject put them down when he made a turn, so he was doing a surface application. So it has a huge effect on that. We talked about nursing, having one tanker going back and forth to the slurry pit and filling the injection tanker so that the more expensive equipment could stay in the field. We found that was only good over larger distances. We found you still need starter nitrogen. When you do a surface application, you think of a corn seed in the ground. When you have injection slits that are 30 inches apart, it's going to take a while for the roots of the corn to reach those injection slits. So we found you still need a little bit of that pop-up or starter nitrogen when you plant your corn, just in case the seed's a little far away from the injection slit. It's not much slower. When we were looking at timing, farmers were concerned it was going to be a lot slower because you're only injecting on maybe a 15-foot swath instead of a 50-foot swath. But we found the farmers could drive a lot faster because they were limited on the 50-foot swath by how quickly their pumps could pump out the manure. And they were spending a lot of time going back and forth to the pit rather than in the field. They were concerned there'd be too much salt in the injection slits, but we found the roots loved, once they found that manure, they went crazy in there. And there is cost share available now in Virginia. It was actually modeled on the cost share program in Maryland. So cost share is available as of July 1st, so only for a month. So it will be available this coming spring in Virginia. We've done a lot of work showing lower nutrient and runoff. Some of our farmers on the rolling land, on the top of knolls, the corn didn't look as good, and they say the corn looks much more uniform when you do inject rather than surface apply. But number 10 here, this is the one I was asked to speak on today. How much extra nitrogen can you get from injection? And what our farmers were interested in is if you inject before corn, can you avoid side dress? Because if you're getting more nitrogen from the manure, hopefully you don't have to take that extra trip through the field, drive over a little bit of corn, and the extra cost of driving through your field and side dressing nitrogen to a growing corn crop. So if you just look at the book values, if you look at the numbers at the top here, this is a typical dairy manure analysis from Virginia. Total nitrogen in manure about 19.22 pounds of total nitrogen per 1,000 gallons, 8.8 of ammonia. So you subtract one from the other, you get about 10 pounds of organic nitrogen. So if you go through the book values, the calculations for an average manure surface versus injected, for the organic component for this 10.34, our book values say 35% of that's going to be plant available, whether you surface apply or you inject. So from the organic component in a typical dairy manure in Virginia, you get about 3.6 pounds of plant available nitrogen. And that's whether you surface apply or inject. Where you really get a difference in injection is with the ammonia. You get a huge amount of ammonia volatilization when you apply liquid manure to the surface of a soil, especially in a no-till situation where it's left there with no tillage in. So with a surface application, the book values say you only get about 25% of that ammonia, so you get about 2.2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons, whereas when you inject, you get about 95%. So once you get the manure below the soil surface, you really don't lose any ammonia. So you get about 8 pounds from the ammonia. So when you look at the total plant available nitrogen, that's what the PAN, plant available nitrogen per 1,000 gallons. If you do a surface application according to the book values in Virginia with the average manure, you get about 6 pounds per 1,000 gallons with a surface application, but 12 pounds per 1,000 gallons if you inject. So that's what the book values say. So we went out and we did a bunch of field trials to see what would happen. So the first thing what happens is, how do you take a soil sample where you inject manure? Here's a field where we've injected on roughly 30-inch centers. So there's manure in a band, and then there's no manure for 30 inches, and then there's another band of manure 30 inches away. So the way we do that is we take 5 samples, 6 inches apart. This was something that Rob Minan did up in Pennsylvania. We tested it out and it worked pretty well. So you can see those dots show where we're taking. We don't need to know where the injection slit is, we just need to know the direction. So that those 5 samples 6 inches apart will do a good way to do your nitrate testing where you have these injected bands of manure. So here's some work from 2014. So on the y-axis is the corn yield, but we have 3 different treatments. We've got broadcast manure with no side dress, injected manure with no side dress, and on the right is broadcast with side dress. So when we did the pre-side dress nitrate test, when the corn was about a foot tall, just the soil nitrate concentration, where we'd broadcast, we had about 28 parts per million. Where we injected with no side dress, it was about 41 parts per million. So you can see about, what's that, about 23 or 13 ppm extra where we injected. And the corn yields, it was slightly higher numerically where we injected, but when we ran the statistics, the yields weren't any different. So here's another site we did in 2014. We just did injection versus broadcast. So this is on farmer fields. So the corn yield was, again, numerically slightly higher where we injected, but when we ran the statistics, there were no statistically significant differences. This is actually something we see quite commonly. Where we inject, we see a slight benefit of injection, but there's so much variability, the statistics don't show it. But again, when you look at the PSNT numbers at the bottom, PSNT 24 where we injected, because we're getting more nitrogen from the ammonia, versus broadcast over 12. And you see the farmer, we left the side dress decision up to him. He did put less side dress out where he injected than when he surface applied. But he got more yield where he injected, even though he did less side dress. And in terms of cutoff, the cutoff where we recommend no side dress, it used to be 20, and then we just updated it this year to about 26 parts per million for a cutoff. So just some rules of thumb. Value of nitrogen from injection. Rule of thumb is your pre-address nitrate, so your nitrate concentration in the soil times 4, because there are 4 million pounds of soil in down to about a foot. It equals pounds per acre. So if you look at the first study, Kyle's pre-address nitrate is nitrate concentration. 41 where he injected, 28 where he surface apply. So he got an extra 13 pounds or ppm where he injected manure, multiplied by your rule of thumb 4. So he got about an extra 52 pounds of nitrogen per acre where he injected. So doing the same calculation for Anthony's, his PSNT was 24 where he injected. It was only 12 where he surface applied. So he got about an extra 12 ppm of nitrate where he injected. Multiply that by 4 for converting your ppm to pounds per acre. So we got about 48 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So on average between these two sites we got about 50 pounds per acre nitrogen more where we injected rather than surface applying. Here's an aerial photograph of some plots that weren't side dressed. So you can see that corn looks a little bit darker in the strips that were injected rather than where it was surface applied, and this was a nitrogen response. That's what it looks like from the air. The corn looks a little greener because it's getting more nitrogen where it's been injected. This is what it looks like at ground level. So you can see here we have corn nice and tall and green where we injected, and here we surface applied, and there's not as much nitrogen availability, so that farmer would have had to side dress this surface application, whereas here where he did the injection he was very happy with the yields with no side dress. Some more soil nitrate concentrations. This is where we did a study in depth in years. So the top figure is in the top 15 centimeters or the top 6 inches, and the bottom figure is 15 to 30 centimeters or 6 to 12 inches. So if we start by looking at the top figure, we have 3 treatments. We've got the control, injection, and surface applied. So the injection is where you have, you've got the nitrate on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And this dotted line is PSNT time, so when the corn's about a foot tall. So you can see where you injected, you're getting a lot more nitrogen, and you're getting a lot more nitrogen when you need it. So this is when the corn is taking up its nitrogen, so you take a PSNT here, and you're seeing a big benefit of injecting your manure. And the surface application was only a little bit above the control, which received no manure. These bars on the top that stick down, that's the rainfall, and we actually had quite a lot of rainfall here early in the year. And because of that, you can see here there's nitrate at the 15 to 30 centimeters or 6 to 12 inches. There was some nitrate leaching onto the injection. So there was more nitrogen leaching to a 15 to 30 centimeter depth where we injected manure. And then manure was injected from about 2 to 6 inches. So that was in 2017, and we repeated this study in 2018. And we saw very similar results. Nitrate concentration in the top 6 inches where we actually placed the manure. Injection of about 40 parts per million. And surface application down below 20. So we're seeing a huge impact of extra nitrogen when it's needed when we injected manure rather than surface applying. Unlike the previous year, we didn't get a whole lot of rain before in the early part of the year, so we actually didn't see any leaching of nitrate where we injected manure. So who would have thought you get more leaching when it rains a lot, right? So when we had got a lot of rain, we did see some evidence of leaching under the injection, but on a more normal year, we didn't see any extra nitrogen when we were leaching. So that was a quick summary of our on-farm field trials for manure injection. We see very clear impact of extra nitrogen. The book values we have come out pretty close to what we actually see in the field. So we do see that farmers are able to cut back their side dress in response to injecting and getting that extra plant available nitrogen. And that's the end of my talk. If there are any questions.
Hopefully everyone can find the chat box, and feel free to enter your questions there. If any of the panelists have questions for Dr. Maguire, you can chime in. We'll hold here for just a few minutes to see if anyone has any questions come through. So we have a question from Michael Walker about what were the rates of manure application for the test.
We left the manure application rate up to the farmers, depending on what their regular management was, but they were always in the range of 6,000 to 8,000 gallons per acre.
Thank you. We have another question about what do you think happened to the nitrogen for surface application during the heavy rainfall event?
Yes, if we go back to that slide.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if we go back to this slide, you can see the surface application is pretty close to the control where there was no manure applied. So any nitrogen with that heavy rain was leached, whereas where we did the injection, there was a lot of plant available nitrogen still in the soil. It was a fairly flat site, but with it was an incredibly wet spring, so even though it was fairly flat, we did get some runoff from that. So the surface application did lose a lot of the plant available nitrogen, whereas the injection did not.
Thank you. And also, in the soil nitrogen leaching study, what date was the manure applied?
And it was applied in the spring, so it would have been late April, early May manure application.
We got a few more questions here. Says, with the last trials presented, did you look at the area under the curve to see how much more cumulative nitrogen was available through the season?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. With the last trials presented, I assume that means that last slide, did you look at the area under the curve, so to speak, to see how much more cumulative nitrogen was available through the season?
I don't know if you can really do it that way because it's because there's corn's constantly taking nitrogen up and it's being leached, so you're kind of measuring the same thing.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If that didn't answer the question, Robert, let us know if you have further clarification for that one. And then there's another question about, is there a difference in injecting before and or into cover crop versus broadcasting on top of cover crop, assuming the cover crop is not going to be harvested before the corn?
We've done some work with cover crops, and we see striping in the cover crops where we do the 30-inch centers. Where you do the injection, it does seem to, the corn is darker and it matures a little bit earlier than in between the injection slits. So we have seen some striping, but we haven't done a lot of work with cover crops. That's more the farmers that we help buy equipment. That's something they've observed.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, is there anything more for Dr. Maguire? Oh, here we go. There's some more coming in here. Oh my.
Let me do one thing for you. Let me close this for you 1 second.
Sorry, one moment.
Take your hand off the mouse for 1 second. If I close that for you.
Oh yeah, that'll help.
I'll get more. And then you can scroll.
Okay.
Okay, so then scroll it totally.
Getting a better view of all the questions here. Sorry about that. Thanks for your patience. Was there any treatment to the manure, such as solid separation or other treatments, prior to applying it to the crop field? Because some operators are using additives to their manure, at least with swine and veal manure.
We haven't looked at that specifically in terms of the injection work we've done. One of the farmers did have a product he was using, and we didn't see any effect of it. He was pumping a little bit into his tank, but when you're looking at the value of these things, I've talked to some people about it, and it sounded like the expected return on the product the product may have cost more than the extra nitrogen it was claiming. But we haven't done a whole lot of work on that.
Okay. Let's see. Someone asked a general question about, are there methods of injecting solid manures?
Well, we're trying a post-litter injector at the moment, but it's at a research scale and it's not ready for release to the general public yet. So no, there's nothing out there that works for solid manures at the moment.
Alrighty, and one more question. Are you able to characterize the energy used for injection versus conventional, and the emission of N2O for one versus the other?
There is some work showing, I haven't done it, but I've read in the literature that there is some work showing that there's more nitrous oxides put out to the atmosphere in terms of, but it's fairly a small number compared to the amount of ammonia that's released from a surface application. In terms of energy, it does take more energy to inject, but we haven't studied that or the saving you get from not driving across and doing a side dress.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Maguire. Now, I just want to do a little exercise real quick with the attendees. Let me pull up my list. Okay, so does everyone see, if you pull up your participants tab for the attendees, do you see a little hand icon at the bottom of your list? If so, please everyone hit that raise hand button so I can see if you know how to raise your hand. Not showing the attendees there. Okay, great. Looks like most people have found it. So I'm going to clear that out. Great. So thanks, Dr. Maguire. I'm going to take this presenter mode back here. And I just want to find out, our next group is going to be Dr. Virginia Ishler of Penn State and Dr. Karsten of Penn State. And they're going to talk about agronomic and financial benefits of manure injection and integrated small grains in a dairy rotation. We wanted to find out a little more information about who's logged in today. So if you are a farmer, could you please raise your hand? Go ahead and hit that hand button if you're a farmer. A couple hands up. Okay. All right, let me clear that out. And then could you raise your hand if you are a crop consultant or any kind of a private consultant? You get an idea of how many of those we have. All right. A couple. All right, and finally, if you're agency personnel, such as you work for Extension or a government agency, go ahead and raise your hand. Great. Good, you get an idea. Looks like a lot of the attendees are in that category. Excellent. All right. Thank you guys for that feedback. That helps us a lot in our presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball here to Dr. Virginia Ishler, and so she can get going on her presentation. Hold on, it's not going down. Hold on. Is there another way I can do it?
Okay.
Change role to presenter. There we go. All right. Dr. Ishler, you should be able to share your screen now.
Is it coming through okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting both Heather and I to speak in this webinar today. And this presentation that I'm going to be giving would not be possible without the collaboration with Dr. Heather Karsten, because she and I have been collaborating on what she's going to be talking about after mine for the past 10 years. And I think because of the work with her allowed us to get funding from Northeast SARE to do this project, which even though the title is The Impact of Corn Silage Harvesting and Feeding Decisions on Income over Feed Cost, it's tying together the whole farm system, which is everything that Heather has been working on for the past decade, at least that I've been involved with. And So this is looking at both the economics, the cropping strategies, and the feeding, and it illustrates that there's a lot of opportunity out there, and it dovetails very nicely with what's being presented today. So our objective was to evaluate cropping and feeding management influence on financial performance. And I know from my experience, it's much easier if we can focus on just one area, the cow or the crops, or just the financial side. But the challenging part is when we try to intertwine all these aspects and the ripple effects that we do in one area and how that impacts others. And so I give credit for Heather for all the work that she has done over these last couple of years of bringing together all these different disciplines and really looking at the whole farm system and taking everything into account. And so my data is actual farm data. This is working with producers and some of the results from this project. And to give you a little bit of the project demographics, in 2016, we worked with 24 producers. In 2017, we added 2 producers to the project for 26. This encompassed, these are very well managed farms. Herd size ranged from 40 cows up to 1,100 milking cows. And very well managed. A lot of them were in the southeast part of the state, central Pennsylvania, and also the northern tier. And total, looking at the number of cows that were accounted for on this project, as well as the total pounds of milk that was shipped. And these farms, we were looking at between 13,000 to 14,000 acres. And of that, about 57, almost 6,000 acres were double cropped, which this has been a huge part of the project that Heather is going to talk about as far as broadcasting and injecting manure. I should point out that unfortunately none of the farms in this project were injecting manure. It was all broadcast. But based on the results I'm going to be sharing, I think there's a lot of opportunity that we can make the argument that injecting manure has a lot of benefits and is something that we should actively trying to get our producers more engaged with. All the farms were feeding corn silage, but we're seeing a large number of farms that are incorporating small grain silage into their rotation plan. And this is something that I think has really changed a lot over the past decade, and I think it goes to the research that's being done at the universities and the benefits that producers are seeing from implementing some of these different rotations. So unfortunately, I'm going to be sharing the bad news with you a little bit here with what's going on in the dairy industry and why everything that we're talking about has a direct financial connection to what's going on in the dairy industry. So we compared the whole farm versus a dairy enterprise, and this is the same approach that we've been utilizing in Dr. Karsten's project for the past 10 years. So this is combining financial data, and this is intensive financial data. This is using FinPack. So you can't get any more detailed as far as the financials that we captured with these producers for 16, 17, and 18. So this is 3 years worth of financial data. So let me just orient you a little bit to this table. So the low profit farms are the farms that never showed a positive return over the 3 years that they were on this project. The medium profit group, they showed a positive return at least 1 year out of the 3 years. The high profit group, they showed a profit at least at a minimum 2 years, and we had quite a few that had a positive return for all 3 years. And just a little bit about the pounds of milk combined that these herds were contributing to the milk shed, and then looking at the average number of milk cows in the herd. So this is where the dairy industry is really feeling the pain. So when we look at the dairy enterprise, loss or profit per cow, the low profit herds are losing about $950 per cow, and this is averaged over 3 years. The middle profit group is losing about $443 per cow. And here, even on the high profit, over 3 years, they're netting $16 per cow. I know we've been talking about diversification on dairy operations, and so these farms were doing some crop sales, and they had other cash income, whether they had a swine or poultry or some other income stream. And even in the low profit farm where they have a substantial amount of additional income, they're still losing on the whole farm $600 per cow. The middle group, about $200 per cow. And here in the high profit, the benchmark, we'd like to see at least $800 to $1,000 profit per cow. And even this group with the other income is only about $450 per cow. So this is where the dairy industry is really struggling. However, the medium group here has some opportunity to easily move up into the high profit group. Unfortunately, the herds that fall into this low profit, their future in the dairy industry is very limited. They are so financially compromised that no matter what recommendation we would make, it's not enough to get them to where they're going to be sustainable. So this is a group right here, our middle profit group, that could really benefit from a lot of the management practices that are being discussed on this webinar today. So as part of the project, we also do a crop enterprise. And so I've just pulled out the numbers for the corn silage and for the small grain silage, which this ranged from wheatlage, rylage, triticale on these farms. And here they're broke out again, low profit, medium profit, high profit. All the farms fed corn silage, but you can see that we have a majority of farms that are incorporating small grain silage into their rotation. And we also had the acreage that was being planted in both corn silage and what was being planted in small grain. And then here are the numbers as far as the yields, as fed tons per acre of corn silage and small grain silage. So our high profit group up here over the 3 years are doing a pretty good job. 21, 22 tons per acre of corn silage on an as fed basis. Small grain silage, excellent yields, over 8 tons per acre. Here we have the middle group, where, I mean, their yields for their corn silage are not bad, but there's definitely opportunity here with what they're getting in the small grain silage, which is comparable to the low profit group. And the low profit group are compromised on their yields for both corn silage and small grain silage. And like I said, this is over a 3-year period, so these farms consistently are not producing what's needed. Where the middle group here, there's some opportunity. If we look at what this comes out cost per ton, so this is using the producer's actual numbers. So we're taking all their direct costs, we're taking their overhead costs and partitioning it into the cropping enterprise, which includes both our owner draw and principal and interest payments. Here on the high profit group, these are excellent prices. $22 a ton to produce corn silage, about $34 a ton to produce small grain silage. The middle group, these costs are not terrible, but there's definitely opportunity to move them more into the high profit group. Unfortunately, the low profit group, these are almost coming close to market prices for both corn silage and the small grain silage. So these farms fundamentally have something that it's not working on the farm to get the yields they need based on the inputs that they're putting in. And when we look at what the high profit, it's costing them $487 an acre, which is phenomenal. When you compare that to the middle and low group, where even the middle group, it's costing them quite a bit per acre. Oh, sorry, per acre, but yet they're not getting the yields. So this group has opportunity for improvement. This group here, their cost per acre is just too high. So what they're putting in their inputs and what they're getting in yields, there's an efficiency issue here that they're not capturing, which this definitely could be something that manure injection, especially for this middle group, could help maybe push them over into this group without too much problem, depending on their quality and quantity issues. So since part of this project was looking at corn silage quality over the course of the project, in some respects we were fortunate because 2016 harvest year was a drought year, and then in 2017 was a wet year. And so looking just at the parameters, you know, we didn't see a lot of dry matter issues between the drought and wet year. But when we look at fiber, which is neutral detergent fiber, in the dry year, we tended to see a little bit higher fiber. In the wet year, we tended to see a little bit lower fiber. We did the 30-hour fiber digestibility as a percent of NDF. We tend to see this in a drought year. We had higher fiber digestibilities compared to the wet year. And then looking at starch, not surprising, in a drought year we have lower starch values. In the wet year we had higher starch values. However, we had very different starch digestibilities. In the drought year we had very low starch digestibility. In the wet year we had very high digestibility values. Again, it would be interesting to delve deeper and looking at the inject manure versus broadcast manure on these farms to see what kind of impact that strategy could make on the quality and ultimately maybe help that middle group be a little bit more efficient in what they're getting out of the cows. One thing I just throw in here is because if you don't measure it, you think something might be working right, but it really isn't. And all the producers told us that they were processing their corn silage. And this is the percent of starch passing through a 4.7 millimeter screen. And with greater than 70% deemed optimal, 50 to 70% adequate, and less than 50% inadequately processed. So the first year, when we measured this in the corn silage sample, 26% were optimal, 65% were adequate, and 9% were inadequate. Well, I can tell you there were a lot of shocked producers when we showed them this data because everybody said they were processing their corn silage, but it technically was not getting processed. So the following harvest year, 50% were optimal, 40% were adequate, and 4% was inadequate. And this is because the producers either checked their equipment or they talked to their custom harvester and made adjustments to get the processing score where it needed to be. And I just bring this up because if producers are looking to inject manure, and just like Dr. Maguire was showing from the aerial view, the difference in the corn silage between broadcast and inject, if your producers aren't measuring it and monitoring it, you're not going to know how that might be impacting the quality, the quantity, and ultimately animal performance. So that's why, and Heather will be talking about this, but why that's so important to be able to look and make some of these comparisons to know if they're working or not. And then just to give you a little bit of some cow data here to show the difference between the low profit, medium profit, and high profit group. The high profit groups were averaging over 80 pounds of milk pretty consistently with decent components. But here the middle group, you know, they're not that much different than the low profit group. Yet they achieved the highest milk price per hundredweight compared to the high profit and low profit group. So this is why this group has a huge opportunity to sort of move up into this high group. Little tweaks in either forage quality, forage quantity could be enough to get them that extra production, make them a little bit more efficient to move them in that direction. And looking at using their home-raised feed costs, even though this group, you know, their feed costs are higher, but they're getting the milk production out of the cows for what it's costing them. And when we monitor income over feed cost, again, the low profit group is just, they're losing too much money. The middle group definitely is in the game, has opportunity, and the high profit group is at least making a little bit of a positive return. So what we keep finding out is that there's no one approach to success, but it comes down to what I say, they need to have an MBA, management. It's the crops, it's cow, it's the cash, it's all intertwined. Good management allows various strategies to work. It's this balance. It's the balance between forage quality and quantity, you know, what we formulate on paper for the cows versus what they actually consume, herd and feed management, and income and expenses. And I can tell you, based on the project working with Heather and just with looking at the crop expenses, that adding the expense of injecting manure is not what's going to make or break the farm operation. So that's why you need to do the whole financial assessment and show that, you know, if you do it and you get the results, that may, like I said, move that middle group up to the high profit group. And the other thing is they need the assets. They need to have adequate animals, facilities, equipment, land to remain profitable. And to end my part of the presentation is our message to everybody, consultants, producers, is that you have to be evaluating both production and financial metrics. It's so much easier to focus on the production side, but you can have excellent herd performance, and I mean, you know, you meet the benchmarks for herd performance, but if your financials are broken, there's nothing that's going to pull you out of that. And so we're calling this the missing link. We can no longer just focus on the crop health or the cow health. We've got to be able to pull together this financial health, because at the end of the day, if you're spinning your wheels focusing on the low profit group, you're not going to get anywhere. However, if the farms fall in that middle group, there definitely is advantage to helping those producers be sustainable in agriculture. And with that, I will be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ishler. Does anyone have any questions specifically for Dr. Ishler about her presentation? And I think the next presentation will also tie in very closely together, and they will complement each other. So please let me know if there's anything about this specific presentation. And Dr. Ishler, if we get any questions that will be covered in Heather's presentation, then you can let us know that as well. So we'll wait just a few minutes to let people type in anything.
Should I stop sharing?
You may leave it up just for a minute in case
okay.
somebody asks about a specific slide. So there is a question here. It says, did the project seek to correlate crop yield and production cost per acre with soil type and basic soil survey productivity ratings?
That's an excellent question. And initially, we did want to try and capture that, but unfortunately, manpower was our biggest bottleneck to this project, because we relied on our dairy educators. We did work with some crop consultants, but the amount of data that we would have needed to collect would have been very overwhelming. And it was a challenge just with the forage collection and the financial data collection. But yes, looking back, it would be really nice to have that data to go along with this. But unfortunately, manpower was our enemy in this project, and we just couldn't collect it.
Thanks. And do you think it's wiser to purchase the injection equipment or rent it?
Well, and that's part of what we do with our financial program, because we can go through those scenarios, and depending on how things are looking with their financial situation, you know, we can, because a lot of our guys do some type of custom hire. So we incorporate that into the budget, and we can evaluate to see, you know, in the short term, you know, would it be better just to have custom come in, or, you know, is it worth looking at investing in the equipment? So, but that's going to depend on what their current financial situation is looking like.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead and type them in now. All right, I think we'll go ahead and move on to Dr. Heather Karsten. So I'm going to go ahead and toss this down here. Yes, okay. All right, Heather, I'm going to unmute you.
Okay.
All right, we can hear you.
So I think I can move to sharing with this icon on the top.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Whoops. Changing when I try to do that.
Oh, yep, share. Should be able to hit share, and then my screen will be an option.
Okay, I have all these little symbols.
If you're using the symbols on the bottom, it should be the third, probably the third from the left with the little arrow pointing up.
Oh, right. Thank you. Okay.
No problem.
Okay, can you see some PowerPoint slides?
Yes, we can. You'll just want to put it into presentation mode before you get started.
Right. Okay.
There we go. Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm glad everyone can join us today. I'm going to talk about what's really a team project. Virginia Ishler is a really important member of our team. I'm going to highlight some of the work of recent graduate students and my colleagues, Doug Beagle, who's now Emeritus Soil Nutrient Soil Fertility Specialist, and Curtis Dell, who's an ARS soil scientist, as well as Jonathan Binder and Rachel Maguire, former graduate students. And this is part of the project that Virginia Ishler mentioned that's been funded really as a team project with funding from Northeast SARE. Can you see this icon, this mouse icon moving at the bottom? Can you see this? No. Okay. Well, it's been a big interdisciplinary.
We can see your mouse, by the way. It's very small, but we can see it.
Okay, great. Thanks. That was a test to make sure. Okay, so it's a big interdisciplinary systems project that's been in place for 10 years. We are simulating growing everything for a dairy herd with farm scale equipment. And it's been funded by Northeast SARE, Penn State, the Agricultural Research Service of the USDA, and we've had some grants with NRCS to do some on-farm work. And so, oops, that slide's not supposed to be there. Okay, so trying to save time here. I think one of the big opportunities, one of the real benefits of double cropping winter small grains on dairy farms is it gives us an opportunity to utilize that manure that's typically applied in the fall, sometimes in the winter, to produce more forage from the acreage. So double crop means we're planting this kind of winter cereal, whether it's rye, triticale, winter wheat, after a previous crop, usually corn silage on dairy farms, and then we're harvesting it the following spring. And so we're essentially harvesting two crops within one season. And that gives us an opportunity to do a lot of things. use that manure, reduce soil erosion, enhance soil health. Live roots are really a great opportunity to enhance soil health because they add organic matter. Oh, I just remembered. They build a habitat for feed the soil organisms, and they build soil structure. Those fine roots support mycorrhizal fungi, a whole slew of soil organisms that excrete sticky polysaccharides, help create aggregates or hold soil particles together, which means then there's pores around the soil particles, which means the soil functions more as a sponge, which allows more water and air to infiltrate and less water to run off. This is just some data from a previous PhD student in a 30-year long-term cropping system experiment that was conducted at Penn State, and it shows you that the water-stable aggregates after continuous corn or corn, soy, summer annuals that had no covers and no perennials integrated in the rotation were lower than the first year of corn after 4 years of perennial alfalfa, or corn after a rotation of a double crop of spring oats, winter wheat that was underseeded with red clover hay that was grown for 2 years. So the more time we have roots in the soil, the increase we see here is in that water-stable aggregates. And there are other benefits, including helping with weed control. So as you probably know, the best way to control weeds is keep them small, because most herbicides are typically most effective when weeds are less than about 4 inches, about the height of a soda can, or also to just keep keep the weeds suppressed and have fewer weeds in the field. And so these are some slides from my collaborators on this project, and John Wallace has done some research to try to reduce the very challenging glyphosate-resistant mare's tail weeds in the Northeast and in regions that I think many of you work in. It emerges typically either in the fall or in these early months in the spring. And so if we can have a winter annual growing and competing with this and creating a suppressive canopy and root system, we can reduce weed seedling emergence. And so they did some research to evaluate the effect of just cover crops. And here you see, compared to not having any cover, so a fallow with no cover, how large these mare's tail weeds grew compared to having rye with clover or rye vetch, much smaller weed seedling size. So much more effective in reducing the weed size. And this is a figure showing how much the mare's tail population was suppressed. So when we have winter annuals that are present through the fall and the spring, we had in this experiment as just over 80% fewer weeds, or a smaller population, than when we had something like oats that winter kills typically and is not going to be out there competing with weeds in the spring. So there's a benefit of having more cover for many reasons, including this benefit of weed suppression. In addition, we are seeing longer growing seasons. And so this is data from the 2018 National Climate Assessment showing how much the growing season has increased in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. You can see since 1895, it's gotten somewhere between 8 and 15 days longer in terms of growing season length. And so we can make use of that with winter annuals, that longer growing season. In addition, we're seeing an increase in extreme precipitation events or heavy rainfall events, for instance. And that means our soil, especially when we have those high rainfall events, if it's not covered, there are no roots and canopy there, there's a high risk of loss of nutrients in soil. And this is a real challenge for the Northeast. As you see, we have in the last, especially since 1958, seen as much as over 40% increase in heavy rainfall events in the Northeast, and in this range of 20 to 30% increase in high rainfall events in the Mid-Atlantic region there. And so that trend is going to continue, or that's the projection. And we need to be thinking about how to retain these nutrients and soil through those heavy precipitation events. So these continuous cover crops or continuous winter annuals give us that opportunity. So first I just want to briefly share some results of Jonathan Binder's work, where he compared, what if you compare the opportunity to use rye for rylage compared to growing it for a cover crop. And so you see the, wrong way. The practices we used, we planted the rye after corn silage harvest. We put manure on in November. And then the plots that were harvested for rylage, we top dressed in the spring with 50 pounds of nitrogen using urea. We harvested off that rylage, and then we applied manure before planting corn. And then in one year, this meant the corn planting was delayed by about a week. With the rye cover crop, we just terminated it with glyphosate. Then we applied manure to that, and we planted corn and side dressed the corn in both scenarios. In this case, we broadcast the manure because in Pennsylvania, that's the most common practice. Whoops. Okay. I'm a little trigger happy here. Sorry about that. Okay, so what happened? Well, by just delaying rye harvest by a week in 2017 and 18, we saw 37% more dry matter in the first year and 112%, and this is dry matter in the second year. And I'm sorry, this is at 65% moisture content. So in 1 year, about a 40% almost, or 35% increase. In another that was a much colder spring, it was a much delayed spring, we saw as much as a doubling. And that meant we also harvested them at slightly different stages of development. And so when we were in 2017, when it was rainy, it was hard to get out there as early. The crude protein was a bit lower than in 2018 when we were able to harvest it earlier, but capture less biomass. In general, the recommendation is to try and harvest that at the flag leaf stage as much as weather permits. And that means you got to be prepared as soon as that's an opportunity with good weather to get out there with your equipment and personnel. And it can make a difference for forage quality, as you see here. But we also found that rylage recovers a lot more nutrients from the manure. So this rylage took up about 31% more nitrogen as it grew longer and grew more biomass, and almost 50%, 47% more phosphorus. And that's being removed when you harvest it for silage. So if you have fields that are high in phosphorus, that are moving into that high P-index range, this rylage harvest can help reduce or draw down some of that phosphorus, which in some fields is an important opportunity to capture with harvesting rylage. And as you see here, on average over those 2 years, growing rylage increased the total forage production by 28%. And so these corn silage yields were not significantly different, but the rylage really made a difference in terms of total forage produced over those 2 years. And that's what others have often found in other trials. So based on what Virginia presented, I think one of the things we need to think about is how can we enhance winter silage yields and quality to help farmers produce more forage on their land with their manure and keep their production costs low so they can produce more of their own feed and increase their income over their total feed costs. And then how can they also optimize their corn silage yields following these winter annual silages. So this is rye that we harvested in our big dairy cropping system experiment 4 days later in April with this long growing season. We've been able to harvest that sometimes in April. And one of the questions we asked is, what should farmers prioritize first right after corn silage harvest in the fall? Should they apply manure first, or should they plant their rye first? So this is also another experiment of Jonathan Binder's. And so we went out there and either prioritized manure spreading. First we applied manure and then assumed farmers were going to go out and chop fields and do other things and come back and plant their rye 3 to 4 weeks later in October. Or we prioritized planting the winter annual rye right after corn silage, as you see here. And then we knew they could delay manure application until later when temperatures are cooler and nitrogen volatilization losses could be lower and mineralization would be reduced, and so they could wait. And we looked at these two practices with either broadcasting manure or injecting manure. And in this case, we went with this relatively high rate of 8,000 gallons to the acre. And just by planting rye first, and this was in 1 year, we saw a 40% increase the following spring in the rylage yield compared to spreading the manure first and planting that rye a couple of weeks later. The second year that we did this, we didn't even get an established rye stand when we tried to come back in this system 3 or 4 weeks later. It failed. We think it was a slug problem, but there could have been other factors, and we could not identify why that failed. So that's not that typical, but we still see this benefit in the first year of earlier planting. What you also see here is that by injecting the manure, if you apply the manure first and plant the rye later, we observed a 27% increase in the rylage yield if we went out there right after corn silage and applied that manure first. So potential benefit with early injection if you're going to prioritize manure application. In addition, when we looked at the rylage quality the following spring, you see in 2017 averaged across both of those managements, so that includes this rye priority planting first. When we didn't see a yield advantage, we did see a protein benefit. The injected manure rylage was higher in protein. And when we look at the data where we were actually able to pull the data with 2018, where we only were able to harvest rylage when we had planted the rye first, we also saw higher quality, higher protein in that rylage, more digestible. Lower NDF means this is more digestible, and so also a higher net energy lactation. And so although maybe we didn't see a yield benefit from rylage with manure injection, if we plant the rye first and inject later in November, we do see a gain in forage quality. So there are real potential benefits from injection for forage quality, and that's, makes sense. We're conserving more nitrogen, as Rory talked about, in the soil for the crop to utilize. So the first point I think we really need to emphasize is that what's most important is to plant that cereal crop, that winter crop, as soon as you can after corn silage harvest. And this is just an image from State College weather, that shows with every day, temperatures are declining as the fall progresses. In addition, the day length, which is shown as in the light blue here, is getting shorter and shorter with every day. And so there's a real gain for every day that you can plant earlier in the fall. It's completely different than spring. I mean, it's of course important to plant your corn early for yield gains, but at least in spring, we're fortunate. Days are getting longer, temperatures are getting warmer. It's the opposite in the fall, and it's even more critical to plant as soon as you can in the fall with these winter annuals to optimize growing degree days or the growing potential. And then, because we recognize it's important to plant as early as we can, we also did a study where, again, we looked at winter rye when it was managed as cover or as a silage crop. We delayed harvest about 10 days for 2 years. We compared injection to broadcasting manure in the fall, and we looked at 2 different times to apply the manure. So in the in the September fall planting time, we applied the manure right after we could, as early as we could after corn silage harvest, and then the next day we planted the rye. So this is the September application time. Or we planted it the same day as we did here on September 26th, and then we delayed the manure application until November. Now this is a picture, the first year where we actually delayed it too long and the snow fell. The second year we applied it earlier in November. But the difference here is applying it right before planting or waiting until November. So the first thing that we found, similar to what Jonathan found, is that by just delaying 10 days in the spring, we have a dramatic increase in biomass. So rylage at 65% moisture content shown here increased 3 to 4-fold over 2 years in forage. And if we had injected the manure in the fall, we also saw with that September early manure application right before planting an increase in the silage yield. And this is because we're putting the manure on early enough where temperatures can make a difference, and then planting the rye the next day. We see on average between these 2 years, 41% increase in silage yield from manure injection, compared to, in this case, the manure was broadcast, surface broadcast, because these are no-till systems in this green yield scenario. We also saw an increased amount of manure nitrogen in that silage, which is something that is an indication of the potential for higher crude protein. We didn't actually measure forage quality in this experiment, but similar to what Jonathan had found, whether we injected that manure in September or in November, there was an increase in the amount of manure nitrogen that was in the above ground biomass, and it was actually higher if we injected it later in the fall, as we saw in the other experiment. So manure injection, whether it's early or late, can conserve more of the nitrogen for the silage. When we do the cost analysis, how effective is injecting manure in September when we know it would be most beneficial? On average, over these 2 years of 2014 and 2015, well, when we surveyed haulers around here, the summary was that it costs about $10 more per acre to inject manure compared to broadcasting manure. When we account for production costs, they're the same otherwise, other than the manure custom applicator cost. And then because we had higher yields with manure injection in September, we had higher revenue, and so we saw higher returns on production costs with injection. It was on average $154 more per acre if the manure was injected in the fall compared to surface broadcast. And that was the September application. What about what happens for corn silage following that rye? And so we followed this through to the next spring, and to isolate the effect of just the fall manure application, we did not apply manure to the corn. We did not side dress the corn. We only used starter on the corn because we wanted to track what is the carryover from that fall manure application. And what you see shown here in the red circles is that the corn silage, these are corn silage yields now, the corn silage benefited. There was a higher yield after all the cover crop scenarios in both years, and after the silage in 3 of the 4 combinations of September applied injected or November injected, we also saw more corn silage. So 35% more with late manure injection in 2014, and on average 30% more with both early and late in 2015. And so silage, then you have to add that on top of those corn silage yields to see the potential for forage production with manure injection in the fall. And you see that we had higher yields also when we add the silage in 3 of those 4 site combinations. So for both years, we had higher yields with the early manure injection averaging about 24% higher, and also with late manure injection in 1 of the years. And so lots of opportunity then to combine double cropping and manure injection, fall manure injection, to increase crop yields of both silage and potentially corn silage. Of course, we would recommend using your nutrient management plan and monitoring how much nitrogen is available to this corn. And in this case, this corn could have used a spring manure and side dress nitrogen likely, and there may have even been opportunity to top dress the silage. Because in this experiment, we applied 4,500 gallons to the acre in the fall. So this data did not have a very high manure application rate. Perhaps more typical of some dairy farms in Pennsylvania. And then when we've done this in our big dairy cropping system experiment, you can see here we've been able to, through our nutrient management plan, reduce how much nitrogen we top dress on our silage. We only put 50 pounds on in the spring. When we've injected the manure in the fall, 80 pounds in the broadcast, we get about the same yields with 30% or 30 pounds less of nitrogen per acre with that injection treatment. And this is the yield that we've been seeing in those, the quality, the forage quality of the rilage, averaged over 3 years. Really decent crude protein and NDFs in the 56 to 58%. So we think this is, especially as Virginia tells me, a good feed. And in some years, it's better feed for dry cows or heifers, perhaps in some of these years where it's slightly lower protein. So if we ask, is fall manure injection worth it? I think these 3 studies show that you can increase rilage yields and the subsequent corn yields if manure is injected to conserve more of that nitrogen. There's potential to increase the forage quality, the crude protein in particular of the rilage. And it can be economically cost effective, particularly if the manure is applied earlier in the fall, such as in September. There are definitely ways to optimize the yield and the nitrogen conservation and the nutrient conservation of that fall manure if you can plant that winter annual as early as possible to get more biomass, whether it's for cover or for silage, to increase that nitrogen manure recovery and retention that can then be carried over and available for corn, to decrease the chance of fall failure. And if we can plant it early, we can also apply the manure even later and reduce potential losses due to cooler temperatures due to volatilization and mineralization earlier in the fall. There are some issues to be aware of. We have a lot of wet springs and cool weather, and so the silage, harvesting that rye and removing it for silage instead of leaving it in the field can provide some benefits potentially. We can remove off that residue that can be good habitat for some pests such as slugs and a no-till system, and that can help warm the soil faster if we harvest off the rilage, which can help with warming the soil so the crop can emerge faster. The risks are that, especially if it's a wet spring, there's potential for soil compaction. Nitrogen can be removed with all this forage harvest, and so we have to be monitoring nitrogen availability for the next crop. So with these potential disadvantages, we definitely have some recommendations. Those are really paying attention to timely management, planting as early as soon as possible, applying additional nitrogen based on nutrient management plans to optimize yields of both the rilage and the winter annual and your double crop summer annual. If we start to have soil compaction problems, consider rotating to perennials for a couple of years, or a more narrow row-spaced, very fibrous grassy forage like sorghum Sudan grass. Grassy perennials would be great. Even don't harvest every year, leave some for cover and avoid the trips across the field. Shorten, the other advantage is you could have a shorter growing season for the corn, but we still typically see higher yields. But that rilage will remove nitrogen that then has to be supplied to the subsequent crop. And if it's a very dry spring, you've got to pay attention to that because you don't want the winter annual to reduce soil moisture for the subsequent crop. And it may mean you have to harvest early or just terminate it for cover. So I think you've seen some of these key practices that I've mentioned. One thing I want to emphasize is that not all farms are the same. Really, because of soil and climate and management differences, farmers should evaluate which winter annuals work best on their farm. It may be winter wheat, it may be triticale, it may be rye as we used in many of our experiments, and it can be beneficial to plant a couple of different ones to allow for some flexibility in them maturing at different times, and then mean you can spread out the harvesting time to get that harvested at the optimum stage, and to be really prepared to plan ahead for planting in the fall and for planting following harvest in the spring. You may need to top dress. You want to harvest at that flag leaf stage. Definitely, it's recommended to spread this out to dry it as quickly as possible by tedding it and be able to get it off the field before it rains and to be able to get in there and plant very soon after the next crop, whether it's corn or another summer annual. And to monitor other nutrients, particularly potassium, if you're removing a lot from your double crop system. So there's a video that Penn State's put together where you can watch a case study of a farm in Blair County that I recommend if you're interested in an example. And that's everything I have. So if there's time, I can take questions, or I can wait until the end.
Yeah, thank you. And if you want to send me that link, I can make sure I share that in an email to all the registrants afterwards.
Sure.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and send them in. We'll wait just a minute, and then we're going to switch over to some of our custom applicators after that to hear about their experiences with manure injection. So, all right, let's see. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. If anyone thinks of any, let's do it after the custom applicator presentation. We'll have a little time at the end for everyone. Thanks for an awesome presentation, Dr. Karsten. All right, if you want to go ahead and mute yourself, I just want to see, Kristen, are you there? Can you unmute your mic? You there, Kristen?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Great. Should I go ahead and you be the presenter now to share photos for Tim?
Sure.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. And then, Tim, we'll need you just to unmute yourself.
All right.
All right, we can hear you. Wonderful. And then, oops. Let me make, yeah, Heather, Kristen, you are the presenter now, so if you can share your screen. And then Tim.
I'm working on that.
Yeah, no problem. Just go to the Share tab and hit My Screen. Great. All right, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself so you and Tim can work together to talk about the photos and Tim's experiences.
Great. Tim, are you there?
I am here. Okay.
Okay.
Right here we have a picture of, this is a unit that we have been running for the past, I believe it's 3 years, right, Kristen?
Yep,
and
we're going into our fourth year.
Going into our fourth year. This is a VTI unit. There's been some challenges as far as the applicator. Just maintaining it, bearings. We like the job that the unit does, but I believe the manufacturer is still working through some issues, just R&D, such as this manifold we run on the back of it. We have no longer using it. It would plug up, and so we eventually went to another. Actually, the manifold is made from, it's a PCE manifold, and we have went to a VTI manifold, and we tried it, and we also jam up with foot blocks, different things like that. Most of our producers that we work for do like this injector. I would say 90% are happy with it. We go to another slide, Kristen.
Sure.
Well, here's a real close up, just where your tube and manure comes in, and then you have your covering discs. We've had a lot of trouble with the bearings. Just seems like with drag lining, the drag line, you're continuously pumping, so it's not like you're stopping, getting load so you can grease it real quick. You keep on pumping steady. Sometimes 10 hours, 12 hours, maybe even longer. This is a picture of the power unit. that basically a homemade unit that I built. I guess it's probably, we have been in the drag lining for 15 years. We started hard hose drag lining, and so this is the power unit that pumps out to the field, one of them. Trying to just think through some more things. With the injection, I do believe with injection, our Maryland producers they get a cost share. I have talked with them. I said, if the cost share keeps up, will you keep injecting manure? And of course it's a yes, but then when we say, what about if it goes away? They're on the fence. So they want to see, and you have the results. You see it in your programs, but some of them are organic farmers, and after we inject the manure, they go in. They have to work the ground. So, you have another slide, Karsten?
Here, I'll show the video of it injecting into corn. Let me just do that right now. Let's see. There you go.
This is at a independent hog operation we do work for in Maryland. They really like this unit. We do their sow unit along with their finisher units. There's your different manifold. It is, when you're drag lining and you have lower rates, that can be a trouble running. You have to run faster. But all in all, I'm sold on drag lining. We have incorporated, working with Karsten, we have a VTI unit on a tanker, and we do a fair amount of work with it. It complements the drag line because if you have a small field out back of the woods or whatever that is tough to get the drag line to, we can take that tanker and it can finish the job. So we can do it with all the fields with the farmers. We've also purchased another tank that has Dietrich injectors on it, and this would be almost like a chisel plow, and it goes deeper in the ground. It is not, we've tried to do some fields in Pennsylvania. It is not Pennsylvania. It doesn't like rocks. As we get into Maryland, it works very well. You can go 8 inches down into the soil, and where your VTI is getting roughly 4 inches, 5 inches down. So we also work with farmers. They want to move the manure farther away, and we'll haul with trucks, and we have like a dump station or frac tank, and we've been doing that for probably 10 years. So.
Someone had a question about which manifold works the best.
Oh, that's interesting. Of course, this type of manifold that you're looking at right now, that's fine when you're working with hog manure, separated manure. When you really have the least amount of organic matter in it, that unit, that works fine. But I'll be honest with you, the jury's still out on that one, as far as with me. I'd like to try some more. We still have a little bit of issue plugging with the VTI, especially foot blocks, plastic. It depends on the farms, just as your other studies were with managing your manure pit. It's not a trash can. And some farmers, you get all kinds of stuff in there that don't belong. I understand things happen, but that's the challenges with what we're doing, custom work.
Thanks.
Hey, Tim, just wanted to ask you if you could talk about a couple issues. One is just the challenges with the last spring, not this year, but 2018, with the water and the differences you saw between drag hose and surface or tanker-based application, and also about how many farmers do you think you've engaged in the project in Maryland?
Farmers that I've engaged in the project, herd size, I would say we work with farmers anywhere from 50 cows to 600 cows. We have several 600 cow dairies. We have a 1,600 cow dairy that we do work for in Maryland. We do, with the 1,600 cow dairy, we do minimal as far as their total volume. We do minimal. We do their cell one, which is what comes off of their separator. What the separator misses, we drag line that. Most of the time, we're hauling that down the road 4, 5, 6 miles. As far as the drag line really shines when you get the wet conditions you can get out on the field. We also, Karsten probably has a picture there somewhere. We've buried that unit in Maryland pretty bad, and we were only pulling about. I myself was doing it, so I'm the owner, so you can't. And I was only pulling about 100 feet of hose, and the bottom just dropped out of the tractor and it buried it. But we can get on the ground. It's not a whole lot quicker than your tanker, but the compaction is where it is. You get out there on the ground, and I've had some producers, really what I would call top-notch producers, and you try to really tell them about the drag line, and some of them are injecting with tankers, and it's just kind of interesting. I had a recent phone call just a week ago, and we talked about it 10 years ago, and he came back and called me and said, I'm just seeing those tanker marks again. And I said, well, it's the drag, you're not going to see those marks with the drag line. So,
we have a couple questions I might go ahead and interject here. Someone asked about the equipment, if you have GPS on there, and what kind of rates you can achieve with your drag line. What
kind of, say it again?
They wanted to know if your equipment has GPS on it or any kind of, like precision equipment like that, and what kind of rates you can achieve with the drag line. Application rates. Correct.
Well, by law, we're supposed to be at 9,000 to the acre in Pennsylvania and Maryland. The VTI can easily 9,000 is fine. We do not have auto steer. Of course, we have flow meters. There are flow meters on our drag line and our top spread. I don't know, Kristen, do you have any pictures of the top spread boom? We have flow meters on both, but no. Because with drag lining, I would like to go to, I'm debating on auto steer. We get into some very large, some nice sized fields in Maryland, and that would be nice, but I have not done that yet.
Kristen, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm not sure I have a picture of what you're talking about, Tim. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I saw it earlier in your slideshow. It's like a, yeah.
Okay.
No worries. Somebody also asked about, they said that you indicated Maryland farmers are not receptive to manure injection without cost share. Do you see manure injection being a sustainable practice in the near term if there's no cost share available?
Oh, that's gonna be all up to their management. The big thing is, like everybody says, they believe that when you inject manure, it slows things down. As far as the drag line, when I made the decision, Karsten approached about would I inject manure. I was on a farm in Maryland, and a fellow that she works with showed up and started talking to me. And the only way I'd do it is if the unit was big enough, just as if I was top spreading, because then we'd pretty much be running the same speeds, and that has worked. We're pumping the same amount of gallons an hour, and that's worked well. The tankers, with my experience, it does take longer. Now, if we're using far away and we're using tractor and trailers to nurse, then you keep the injector in the field, and we can, as long as the trucks can keep up, but we can run, with my experience, we've run 800 to 900 gallons a minute injecting manure. That's about as fast as we can keep the manure coming to us. That answer your question?
I think you highlighted it. Thank you. We have another question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interject. Karsten, if you have something else you wanted to highlight first, we can hold more questions for after.
My Karsten found the picture.
There she is. Your favorite tractor.
Yeah, that took a little bit to get out, but we had it was very cloudy that day, and the farmer, as you can see, look how high the regrowth in the rye, and we're just he's wanting to get corn planted, and so we're trying to move along. We actually, that day, we ran most of the day. They were calling for rain, and rain hadn't come, and we started early, and we had got a good day in there, probably over half, I believe I can remember, over 500,000 gallons. And then this happened, so that was a sign to quit. And then right after we quit, it wasn't much long after that it started raining.
Tim, thank you very much. Emily, why don't we go to Jeff and then take questions that both of them can answer when we get to the end of Jeff's presentation.
Sounds great. Thank you, and great job, Tim. Thanks very much.
Yep, thank you.
All right, sending it over to Jeff. So, Jeff, you there? You'll have to unmute your mic. And Tim, if you don't mind muting yourself as well, that way we can.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Jeff, I can hear you. So you'll just want to go
Okay.
ahead and share your screen now.
Yeah.
All right, excellent.
All right. So yeah, my name's Jeff. We've been working with Karsten here. We've been in the hauling business since 2000, and then recently, 2017, we got into manure injection with a buyout of some of the tanks from Lehman Ag. So that being said, they were injecting, I guess, worked with some of the earlier projects back all the way in 2010, I believe. Am I right on that, Karsten?
Sorry to interrupt, Jeff. It
Yeah.
sounds like maybe your mic is hitting against your mouth or something. There's a little bit of a muffled sound going on.
How's that?
That's better.
Is that better?
I think so. There's a little bit of like airflow sound.
Okay. Hang on a sec.
Are you using a headset?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, just maybe bring it about another half inch away from your mouth.
How about that?
That's perfect.
Thank
you.
Okay. All right. So yeah, we got into manure injection through buying out some of Layman Ag's customers. They were working with manure injection since 2010, I believe. So yeah, they had started this PA SAM project with Karsten there, and so yeah, we have 26 farmers engaged in the injection or that tried injection. Now we also work outside of the sustainable the Chesapeake Bay, so. Like last year, we did 4,000 acres. So as far as getting results, as far as getting more acres and involvement with injection, it's worked pretty well. Penn State with Lee and Ressler did a corn silage plot, and that showed a 2.5 ton increase per acre. And we have the tank-mounted injectors, 3 of those, and one dragline injector. Here, it's just a picture of us showing, injection 1.5 mile from the storage. On the tank injectors, here you can see we are set up with the prescription application. So we can basically the grid sample on the left there shows the potash needs. So we went in with the Manure applicator and we mounted on the tank, and we could apply 2 different rates there. We had it set at 5,000 and 9,000, and it adjusted the rate automatically. So I see that's going to be a useful tool, like in that on this small field here, he was able to achieve more gallons on that field by having variable rate. Here we show injection 2 weeks apart. This was after first cutting grass on the left there. That was applied 9,000 gallon of duck manure in the summer, which the odor reduction. These guys are, we didn't have to convince them to inject once we were equipped. And then you can see the regrowth coming back. He's still farming that field. So that gives us another option there. So as far as manure injection, we feel manure injection with the dragline is by far the most efficient way to inject manure. And dragline is becoming a very popular method to apply manure. So merging these two, I feel would be a good time with that. There's a lot more guys looking at dragline, and with injection there, it doesn't really slow you down at all. It's actually a better tool when you're draglining rather than surface application. Precision ag works well with injection as far as GPS, like Tim was saying there, with hands-free or auto steer, as applied mapping, variable rate. I will say the variable rate, like prescription rate, like I had showed earlier, you can't do with the dragline at this point. They got to update some things, we need some changes to the dragline system for that. Odor reduction on farms will adopt the injection to keep neighbors happy. Here you can see, I don't know how many of you, if you can all see this, but there you can see we surface applied on the left before the rye was planted in the fall, and on the right you can see that was injected 9,000 gallons to the acre, and you can see where we ran out there right in the middle. You can definitely tell the uptake in the rye there. Basically, this is just showing the corn stalks are still standing, the minimum disturbance there on the corn stubble, which is what the no-till community wants to see. Challenges, I would say clogging of injector tubes, which Tim mentioned. I would say in the future, if we're going to try to adopt injection, we should look at, trying to get separators in place. I mean, most of the farms are looking at that. Also, just getting the education out there to make sure they're keeping, trash and different things out of the pits. We did on our injection drag line bar, we do have a manifold that leaves the trash drop to the bottom, and it has a chopper in there. That's the only one that we found that worked so far. Like on our tank injectors, we have those disconnected. They really didn't work well for us. So we're having the same problems Tim is having, except we found one that's working better, and that's our injector bar for the drag line, which is that Bazooka Farm Star. So adopting, I think we're all here to figure out what it's going to take to adopt manure injection in PA. And this PA SAM project, we wouldn't be into injection as much as we are if that wasn't, that kicked it off. We had interest from the customers. I do think that the framework of that project, the subsidy with the custom applicator, buying the equipment, and then getting compensated on a per acre basis is a good model. I know the ones in the past, I believe the equipment was purchased, but it is a lot of work to inject. And if the customer or the custom operator doesn't have any skin in the game, this stuff's going to end up sitting in the weeds. So this way, I mean, you're going to want to get out there and run the equipment and promote injection, because it does take selling with customers, even if there is no cost, no additional cost to them. It takes time meeting with them, explaining how it works, and that's why I think getting some more custom guys engaged in this would be a good fit. And it looks like from all those results with Jenny Ishler and all the the forage results are there. It's just changing a mindset. So and the farmers are looking for a better solution right now to apply manure, out of sight, out of mind. So that's basically all I have. And as far as I wanted to mention as far as the more challenges other than the clogging would be terraces, contours, and field size with the drag line. Those are some challenges that we see, and that would be injection in general. We have to keep that in mind, but it can be done. As far as the time to inject, I would say that depends on the shapes of the fields, contours, also operator skills. I mean, if you got things set up well, drag line doesn't really slow you down, but with the tank injectors, there is some variability there that can affect that. If you do a 3-corner field, it's going to definitely take longer. So, all right, I'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Jeff. Kristen, is there anything else you wanted Jeff to highlight before we get into questions?
Well, I really appreciate both Jeff and Tim, and I just want to say that between them and our partners on the Western Shore, Allegheny Ag and the Catoctin Frederick Soil Conservation District, over the past going into 4 years, we have now over, close to 100 farmers that have participated in the manure injection projects, which I really appreciate because most of them are dairy farmers, and this has been a really rough time to talk to dairy farmers about trying something new with all the financial worries and stress they're under. So I'm just really grateful that we've had so many farmers willing to try this conservation practice. And, this is also just thanks to Tim and Jeff and Richard Strite with Allegheny Ag and the folks at the Catoctin Frederick Soil Conservation District and Shore Rivers also on the Eastern Shore that have gone out and talked to people about it. So it's been pretty successful despite this challenging time.
Excellent, thank you. So I guess I'll go ahead and get to some questions here. These can be for both Jeff and Tim if you want to chime in if you have an answer as well. So some of the questions from before, which, like I said, either Jeff or Tim may be able to answer. Someone asked, are some farmers in Maryland injecting manure in fall when some aren't as concerned about slowing down field operations? If so, are they injecting manure and combining it with a winter annual or perennial crop?
Tim, that'll be you.
Yes, there are farmers injecting in the fall. Again, working with organic farmers, they're relying on the organic farmers I work with are dairies, and they're relying on this fertilizer for triticale, and so they are injecting. The ones that I work with, they're sold on injection. I mean, this is really helping their organic operation. They're capturing their ammonia nitrate. Something I wanted to, Jeff, while we're on here, answer that question. Don't you think injection, they're going to capture more nitrates, and as we have dairies getting larger, ground availability, they're going to need to cover more acres.
I have that on my list.
Yeah.
So should I touch on that a little bit?
Go ahead, Jeff. Yep.
Yeah. So, the nitrogen availability. So, we're going to reduce the gallons. That was another challenge I had on my list. So I go into a farm and we say, all right, we're gonna inject now. So your nitrogen is, the plan writers always choose the, incorporate or no incorporation. So your availability factor changes when you inject, and some of our farms are really counting on that nitrogen to volatilize, and we got to move more liquid further, and so they're just standing on the sidelines. They said, we don't want to try injection until we have to because we don't have enough land, and they say the system with the nutrient management system is somewhat has somewhat of a loophole in the system with, if you get rain, that's incorporated same day, and that's not accounted for in the plan. So I do think we need to look at that.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think nutrient management planners really can be an asset to their clients in terms of whether or not manure injection is a good fit for them. And if it's not, because they're relying on that volatilization, I mean, that's a really tough spot for a farmer to be in, because that, in that type of production system or that type of system in an ongoing basis, you're really going to build up your soil phosphorus. So, I think having these conversations with, while that plan is getting revised and updated to determine whether manure injection is a good fit for your client is going to be really helpful to them, because ultimately, you know, conserving nitrogen improves the NP ratio of manure and keeps those phosphorus levels and can keep them down while getting the maximum nutrient utilization from the manure. I think, you know, Rory touched on that pretty well when he talked about retaining nitrogen. So that's just something to keep in mind. And when we first worked in Pennsylvania, it was with Red Barn, and they went out and talked to their clients that they thought might be interested in manure injection. And for a lot of folks that can inject manure because they have enough land, one of the biggest barriers for the reason that they're not trying it is that their custom applicator doesn't have the equipment. So getting more folks to get the equipment, I think, is going to be a challenge moving forward, so that their clients have the opportunity to try it and see if it's a good fit for them.
So that's awesome. Thank you so much for chiming in there and including that. We have another question about spread width as well, about injection versus broadcast. I think this individual is thinking a lot about compaction reduction aspect. He's asking about when you offer dragline injection to a farmer who has been using surface applied tankers, what is most appealing to them? And the compaction reduction aspect of draglining or injection. They're kind of asking about all those type of things. So do you have anything to comment about in that area?
Go ahead, Jeff. I'll follow up.
All right. Yeah, so injection with dragline, like I said in the presentation, you know, we're new to it. Tim has a lot more experience than we do, but I mean, it's taken on. I mean, we've done a lot of acres, 1,500. This, you know, it's just it's a really good fit with the dragline. So now you can't use that everywhere, but yeah, they're much more open to that. I think that was the answer, what you were looking for, you know, the question there. I didn't catch all of it, but yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
I'd say one thing with some of the producers that I've worked, but see, I really started with draglines, so some of them, I've been working with them for over 10 years, so now it's just a change from surface application. Now, we still have people in the spring that we top spread on your spring cereal grains, but the big thing, I'm losing my train of thought. The big thing is with tankers, most of the time, the demand starts at the same spot every year. And that if they don't rip or they don't do anything to the land, that's the same area. The spread width is the same. And where draglining, some farmers get upset with me, but we will run angles. So we don't always run. It's like running a turbo till you run different directions, and we'll run different ways. But your field is still getting covered. The whole field's getting covered. Just you're not running the same way they plant their corn all the time. And some of them get upset, and some of them just say it needs cover.
Thanks. I think that hopefully answered that question. Let us know if it did not. Yep. Dr. Karsten, did you want to chime in about anything here? You mentioned you might like to chime in.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to ask how amenable or how many of the producers are doing manure application in the fall where they could be injecting and combining it with perennials. I know, Tim, you said that the organic growers are doing that, or perennials or winter annuals, because as Kristen was alluding to, if they harvest that winter annual in this double crop system, we're finding it can remove more phosphorus and nitrogen. So if a limitation of injection is that, you know, they're not allowing more nitrogen to be lost through volatilization and worried about their soil phosphorus levels climbing, if they can just harvest off more of that manure with double cropping, there's, you know, an incentive to do manure injection, and we've shown, you know, it can give you more yield from your winter rye and better quality, and can potentially conserve more for the next year's spring corn silage. So maybe that's a trade-off in the nutrient management plan, but I think there's a selling point there, right? That it can also, double cropping and manure injection gives you the opportunity to harvest off more fall manure nutrients. You know what I'm saying? Is that an opportunity? And one of the reasons, I should just add, that we looked at this is because people are not as rushed in the fall to get manure out there as they are in the spring. And a lot of our research is showing that you can go out and plant your rye first and then take your time to get out there and put the manure on. That you'll still get a benefit of injecting it if you get it out there in late October or November. So the time that it takes to do this is not, you know, as much of a problem, I think, for them as it is in the spring. Is that a potential selling opportunity also?
Hey, we're hiring. Tim, how about it? We could use some more people in the crew.
Excellent. Well, yeah, go ahead. If you want to just add one more.
I mean, the fall there can be a bigger window, but you're taking a risk by not applying the manure till after the crop's planted. We've done it before. I think there just needs to be more equipment out there. It's what within reason. You know, it's.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, it has to be well established to minimize damaging the rye or the whatever winter. Yes, that's true. We found that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't put it on 3 weeks later. You want to postpone it, preferably, 6 weeks, 8, whatever, until it's really well established.
And see, with Maryland, that's more of an issue because there is no wintertime spreading in Maryland.
But if you have vegetative cover, aren't you allowed to spread in the fall?
Well, until December 15th.
Okay, so if you could do it before then.
Right. But see, like Jeff's saying, it's
yeah.
And you're gonna have to show and your studies show it there, and these producers that were the state of Maryland showing their dairies declining more and more. I just saw recently, just last week, and I believe if you can show the data to the producer, like what you have, and then with Maryland's incentive, but Pennsylvania, I with your different groups, especially the Amish, I don't see how Pennsylvania's. It'll be interesting for them to. I wouldn't say how they inject manure. You're right.
Well,
Does that make
we have to work with a custom hauler.
I might have got off on a bunny trail there, but.
Well, I'm assuming they would work with a custom hauler. That's how we've done it, and in our assumption of the economics.
Yeah.
Well, this is an excellent discussion. I hope everyone's gotten a lot of their questions answered. If anyone, we are after 3 now, and I see some people are starting to sign off. But I just wanted to thank everyone again for all the panelists for your time and everyone who attended. And Kristen, if there's any just last things that you needed to add, feel free to go ahead. Are you there, Kristen? Yeah, Kristen, you're muted there. I unmuted you.
Okay, I just want to thank everyone, all of our presenters, and thank you, Emily, and your team at University of Maryland for helping us to host this manure. We really appreciate that. We couldn't have done it without your support. And if any nutrient management planners or folks that are on the call, crop consultants, have any questions, feel free to contact us, and we're happy to help give you as much information as we have to share.
I know. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, and my email address should be in the emails regarding the presentation, regarding the WebEx. So just let me know, email me, and I can get you in touch with any of the presenters. And there were a few little lingering questions, but hopefully if you need them answered, just send me an email. We'll get those answered for you. Well, thank you, and everyone have an excellent week.
Thanks, Emily. Bye, everyone.
No problem. Bye.
Emily.
Yes.
Now, for typing in your certification number and all, you just click on the box there?
Yeah, so there's a chat box, and you just make sure that it says all panelists as the people you're sending it to. That way just the panelists get it. And go ahead and just type your name, the, the states and your certification number there. That way I can send it on the right list to the right person. Okay,
wait a minute, I'm a little lost. So I click up on my panelist where it says 5.
I click on your chat box. It should have a chat section. Let me see. Let me see what it might look like for you. Not
share content.
No. Should be, it looks like a little speech bubble, like a cartoon speech bubble.
Okay. Yep.
And then in the bar where it says 2, so you can choose, there's a drop-down menu. Once you click, let me see. Once you click that, should pop up. And
what should pop up?
Once you do that, you should be able to see kind of all the chats that have come through so far. Do you see that?
No, I don't. So once I click that bubble. And then where's the chats at?
It should be over to the side. You may have to expand it. It kind of pops up to the right side usually.
Close participants. I'm not good.
Tell you what, if you just email me your information, I can probably. You were a panelist. You were here the whole time, so I'll be able to add that to the list.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not showing up in there.
Okay. Very good.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.